Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here this morning. My name is Alex D. George. I am the chairman of the Parkway Business Council, and on behalf of the PBC and the Kissimmee Osceola Chamber of Commerce, I welcome you this morning to our webinar. We have some great information for you today. We've got two incredible people that are going to be able to give us some great information in regards to our role as employers dealing with COVID-19. So I'm going to get going here and introduce. We've got Jaime Escobar. Jaime is the sales executive for the small business division of ADP. He's been with ADP for 5 years, and he currently manages 12 ADP district managers in Central Florida, spanning from Ocala all the way to Melbourne and Palm Coast to Lakeland. He also has a master's degree in business administration with a master in risk management. He is also certified. He's also state certified in payroll, and he used to be or was the former president of the Latino Referral Group for the Kissimmee Osceola Chamber of Commerce. Also with us, we have Carey Stephenson, and she is the senior HR business partner with ADP Comprehensive Services. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Management Information System from the Florida State University and is currently working on her Juris Master's degree in Legal Risk Management and HR Compliance from the Florida State University College of Law. She also received her PHR certification in 2008, and she's also a Shrimp CP certified since 2015. So we've got two great people here. So I'm going to welcome Jaime. Jaime, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great, Alex. Thank you for having us.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to let you be, and please, I look forward to the information that you and Carey are going to give us.
All righty. Well, thank you, everybody, for having us, and we look forward to answering some of your questions. What we're going to go ahead and do now in that comment sections, we're going to be posting two links. One of those links is the return to work guide that we have to offer to every single one of our clients and our anybody really. It's open to the public, and we're providing you that for you. If you could go to the table of contents, I'll kind of show you what's available in there. And there's a ton of links in the PDF format that are available to you with different type of webinars and some informational webinars. So if you go to page 19. These are some of the questions that we're asking our clients, for example, to ask themselves when they're ready back to work, and what are some of their responsibilities and what they should be thinking of when they're bringing back their employees back to work. And we have some tools available to our clients as well that's already available within our platform. But I want to go ahead and hand it over to Carey, who has been doing this a very long time, and she's going to go ahead and answer 3 of the most common questions that we're receiving from our business owners that are contacting her directly. So, Carey, take it away.
Thank you, Jaime. And good morning, everybody. I wanted to talk about the top questions that I'm getting asked on a regular basis by my small business clients. The first is around reopening. How do I go about reopening? What are the things that I need to be aware of? And as Jaime mentioned, that readiness checklist that was in that document kind of guides you through that. So the first thing to keep in mind is under OSHA requirements, an employer is required to provide a work environment that is free from known hazards. At this point, COVID-19 is considered a known hazard. So you are required to make sure you're taking steps to mitigate that hazard. So the checklist goes through a number of items, but really it's thinking through how am I going to handle the social distancing aspect? Do I have enough room to have desks separately? Can I stagger work schedules so I don't have everybody here at the same time? What am I going to do as far as break rooms and restrooms and things where you're going to have people in an enclosed space? Although you may be able to have the desks far enough apart or the workstations far enough apart, will you have the space in those areas to be able to have one person in or no more than a few people in if the space doesn't allow for it? So it's really looking at what makes sense from the CDC guidelines as far as what you need to do for social distancing, mask wearing, things along those lines. And this is not only for your employees, but also for any customers or visitors that you're going to have to your work site as well. So you need to kind of think through those. So people have seen, if you've been out and about, that there's lots of stores that have put up the plexiglass in between cashiers and the customers, things along those lines, looking at what you can do to make sure that you are providing a work environment that's free from that hazard as much as possible. And I always recommend once you have done those things, you really, really, really need to communicate that. So you need to tell your employees, here's what we've done. We had a deep cleaning last Friday night. These are all the safety precautions we put in place. I recommend a documented letter telling them, here's all the things that we have done to prepare the workplace for safety. And then making sure you have the proper signage and postings, not only for employees, but also for customers. So that's the key piece to kind of think about when you're reopening. What can I do to make this workplace more safe, and to make sure that I am separating people as much as possible, maybe even grouping people in separated shifts, like I mentioned, but having the same group of people work together on this shift and the same on that shift, things along those lines. So as much as possible, the CDC website, but also ADP has a lot of great guidelines as far as what are the best ways to kind of tackle that. So really looking at what you can do there. The other piece that I've had a lot of questions about is, okay, I have an employee, they've told me that they've tested positive, what do I do now? So in that instance, again, I do recommend going to the frequently asked questions and the CDC website, because they will go through and taught and has a lot of different questions around how long ago was the person in your workplace, and based on that, what type of cleaning procedures you would need to do. You do need to talk to the person who's tested positive and make sure that you're asking them who they've been around. So have they been in contact with vendors? Have they been in contact with fellow coworkers, customers? Who have they had contact with in the last 10 to 14 days prior to testing positive? Because all of those people would need to be contacted to let them know that they were exposed to somebody who tested positive. Now, there is a privacy requirement. You're not permitted to give that person's name out. So you cannot tell somebody, hey, you know, Joe Schmo over here tested positive, and that's why I'm telling you, because you had contact with him. You cannot give out their name without their explicit permission. So you have to kind of phrase that in, you know, we just want to let you know you were exposed to somebody who did test positive, and that we do recommend that you take the necessary precautions, get tested, check your symptoms, things along those lines. So all of those are important pieces on that, and you want to make sure that you document that as well, because in the HR arena, if you don't document it, it didn't happen. So you want to make sure that you have documentation, not only of the person who tested positive, but also that you've notified others, usually with a letter or something along those lines. And then the third question I get most often is, okay, I've readied my workplace, I've notified my employees that it's safer, and all of the precautions I've taken to make it safer. What do I do if somebody says they don't want to come back? And some of my clients have pushed everybody to working remotely when everything started, and then are gradually bringing people back into the office or into the workplace. And that is definitely a difficult question, in that most employers tend to go with, well, if somebody's refusing to work, then that's a termination offense, right? And in the prior scenario, and before all of this happened, absolutely yes, that could possibly be the case. However, in this scenario, the why is really critically important. So why somebody is saying that they're not comfortable coming back to work, or they don't want to come back to work, is really what you have to do. So you really need to talk to the employee, understand what is the why. So is it that they're concerned about safety? Because that's something that you can kind of reiterate and go through what you've done, what you've put in place, the precautions, those types of things. Is it that they have personally a medical condition that they feel like they need to work from home, or they need to be remote and can't come back in the office? That would fall possibly under the ADA law. So Americans with Disabilities Act does cover people for accommodations if they have a condition that could qualify as a disability. So if somebody says they have a medical condition and they feel that it would impact them being able to come back to work, you're required under the ADA, if you have 15 or more employees, and as a best practice, you would do it with any number of employees, to accommodate for that. So it's really a process. It's an interactive process between the employer and the employee to figure out what that accommodation is. So it involves them getting documentation from their doctor and looking at what accommodations are available. It may be that a remote work accommodation is acceptable. unacceptable. It may be that they need to stay out on leave for a little while. You kind of have to look at what the specific condition is along those lines. If it's something like, I'm on unemployment and I don't want to give that up, that's not really a valid reason not to come back to work. And essentially those people are going to lose their unemployment by denying themselves an opportunity to come back to work. So if an employer offers an employee their job back and they say, no, thank you, I don't want to come back, they could possibly lose that unemployment on that side. So it's really kind of walking through what the why is behind why somebody doesn't want to come back, to kind of understand what it is that's going on with them, if it's something that needs to be addressed by an ADA accommodation or not, because all of the employment laws are still in effect. None of those have gone anywhere. Now, there's been some more wiggle room added in that prior to COVID-19, you would never be allowed to take people's temperatures before they came into work. But with the pandemic, they have kind of expanded some of those things where they've allowed you to do things like that to protect the workplace. So you do have to comply with all of the same employment laws that you did previously. And so you do have to make sure that you're asking those critical questions to kind of walk through what those reasons are if somebody may not want to return to work. Those are the top 3 that I get on a regular basis.
Incredible. Thank you so much. So you mentioned something that I was going to ask you. That was in regards to somebody not coming back. Obviously, if you do have an employee who decides not to come back, kind of like in the military, whenever you have somebody that is in the National Guard or Reserves and they're activated, their job is essentially frozen or protected. In this case, if the person doesn't want to come back, then there's no legal ramification for the employer, correct?
It depends on the size of the employer. So if there is the Family Medical Leave Act that covers employees, if you have 50 or more employees in a 75-mile radius, and the employee has worked at least a year and a certain number of hours, then the Family Medical Leave Act could apply. So it would depend on, again, if they have a medical condition that doesn't qualify as a disability but would qualify under FMLA, that would be something you may want to look at. And that's really, again, for employers of a certain size, so they have to have more than 50 employees. So for smaller employers, that wouldn't apply. But that's where I talk about there's lots of different employment laws that come into place. The Congress passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act earlier this year in March, and that became active April 1st. That provides paid sick leave for employees and paid family medical leave for employees, and that is funded by tax credits. So essentially, the employer isn't really out any money for those leaves, but that is a federal law that you're required to offer that to people that qualify. So if I am an employee and, for instance, I am told by my doctor that I need to quarantine or self-isolate, I'm not allowed to come into work, I need to provide documentation of that, but I would have up to, being a full-time employee, I would have 2 weeks of paid sick leave at my disposal to use for that. So there's a number of different, that's the new law, but all of the same ones as far as the Family Medical Leave Act and the ADA would still apply there. So it's kind of taking the new one and the other two and putting them all together and figuring out which of these laws applies to this employee in this scenario. And with most of my clients, I'm telling them, give me a call. Let's talk through the specific scenario, because for one person, one set of laws may apply, for another one, a different set may. It kind of depends on the circumstances, especially with the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA. It's really kind of complicated as to who gets what and under what conditions. To give you an idea, the frequently asked questions page is 103 questions. To me, and my rule of thumb is the more frequently asked questions you have, the more complicated the law you have written. So 103 questions gets really complicated. And it's really, you kind of have to go through and say, how does this specifically apply to this person's situation? Because somebody else's is slightly different, because there's caveats in the law for if I myself am sick, if I'm taking care of a family member that's sick, if I have to quarantine, if they have to quarantine, and as well as if the schools are not open and my child has to do remote e-learning school, because the school is not open at all, there's a caveat in there for that as well. In the majority in Florida, most schools are offering multiple options, although I know in South Florida, they're still working on what that's going to look like. But in that instance, it may not apply because the schools are actually open. So the employee had a choice in that instance, so it may not apply. So it gets super complicated.
Right,
super fast.
right. So even more important to be able to have a human resource person that you can count on to be able to get this kind of information and stay in compliance. Now, I do have another question, and this is in regards, if you have people working remotely for you, are you as an employer obligated to provide all the tools for them to be able to operate out of their home, just like they were in the office?
Essentially, what you are required to do is to make sure they have what they need to do the job. So, for instance, if I need to have a computer, ideally you want me to be working on one of your computers versus my own home computer, because you can't really control what kind of information and data is coming through that. So, in that instance, however, I have talked to a lot of clients and given out some sample policies around remote work that essentially says, like, you're, as an employer, you're not required to create a home office for them. You're not required to give them a desk or anything along those lines. Essentially, the tools that they would need to do the job, having the computer, making sure the phone connection, those types of things, and internet side is really what's required for them to be working from home. You're not expected to, pay for remodeling or anything along those lines, but you do have to keep in mind that there is some liability along those lines. So if I'm working from home and I hurt myself doing something at work, that could still fall under workers' compensation.
Wow.
So yes,
I was not aware of that.
Always fun that way. But you have to be very careful with how you explain to employees exactly what's going to happen. Like, you're not going to be, here's the equipment that's yours that I'm not liable for. Here's the equipment that's mine that I am liable for, and really kind of lay that groundwork so they understand. Now, I know when COVID first happened, everybody just said, go home. We'll figure it out. So it's kind of like building those structures back place if you're going to have that. And I've had some clients who, they've done remote work and they said, wow, this is great. We're not going to come back to an office. We're going to get rid of our lease and we'll be remote from going forward. And then I've had others who said, this is really good. We're going to give people the option. So we'll, have a few days work from home, those types of things. But all of that, you kind of have to take into account because the workers' compensation ultimately falls under where they're working. So if I'm working from home, obviously I have to be working. I have to be sitting here in my home office as I am. If I'm over in the laundry room pulling stuff out of the dryer, that doesn't count. So it's very slice and dice-ish that way too. But it's making sure that it's very clearly laid out.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I would have never thought of that. But so obviously, as an employer, if you got people working remotely, you're essentially liable for them while they're in their work hours, correct?
Yeah, as long as they're in their work hours doing the work. Again, if I go out and am checking the mail and get, hit by a bicyclist or something, that's not going to be counting as work time. I mean, it is within work time, but I'm not going to actually be working at that point. So it really gets really nitpicky and very difficult for the workers' comp side because it has to do with like, well, what were you doing when this happened? If I'm taking, laundry out of the dryer, I'm not actually working. But it is very important that you make it very clear to the employee that the expectation is that they're going to be working. Same thing with data security, that they're locking their computer, they're not letting their family members look at any of the data or information. All of that's critical too in a remote work type of environment as well.
Awesome, fantastic. I've got one more question. This is in regards to obviously you mentioned about taking the temperatures, right? Are we as employers required to keep records of all the temperatures that we've taken, and are we supposed to supply that to anybody else, or are we just supposed to keep it as record in the future in case of any type of audit?
In general, if you're taking health type of information and you record it, then you're required to keep it for a much longer period of time. There isn't any requirement that you record it. It essentially is you're taking it and either pass the the guideline or you don't. So it's either pass or don't pass, that type of thing on that side. And I've had clients who are doing that for not only the employees, but also any visitors coming into the building. And they'll essentially say, you know, we did a thermal scan and your temperature is higher. I'm sorry, you can't come in today. And it's doing that. It isn't so much, you can record it, but if you record it, there's some obligations under the documentation as to how you keep it and how long you keep it. And you're not necessarily required to do that. You're really just required to say, okay, this person's not in because they didn't pass the temperature check, and go from there. So and you have to go through a lot to kind of make sure that the people who are doing it are trained. You have documentation that shows that they were trained, and that it's being administered completely across the board equally, that everyone's going through the exact same process to come back in. So whether it's taking temperatures or maybe it's a questionnaire, you know, asking about who they've been in contact with, as far as anyone with COVID-19 or if they had any symptoms, you want to be very consistent and across the board with that. So where you're asking everybody the same questions the same way, you're doing a temperature checks the same way, if that's what you're choosing to do, to make sure it is a uniform process. So there isn't something where, well, you know, this group of employees gets this treatment, but this other group doesn't, because again, that could cause some issues under employment laws too.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, guys. So what we're going to do, we're going to open it up for questions from the public. So do we have anybody out there that would like to ask any questions? And we do. From Stella. It says, does ADP have a legal department for support?
So we have, depending on the size of the company, we have, for example, we have an HRBP or business partner. We also have some legal departments depending on the size of the company. For example, we're dealing, myself, I deal with mostly 1 through 49, and Carey deals with 150 and less. So in my realm, depending on the, you know, we start saying, hey, if you have an employee, you have a liability. Let's take care of that. So we have small packages for one person to like 150 people. And depending on how many employees you have, we'll suggest on what package you should have. And in one of those packages, we do have a legal advice department that, you know, would read contracts and do, you know, partnership contracts. Or if you do have a question to a SHRM certified person like Carey, you have a direct line to them and ask them any questions. So the questions I always ask, you know, like, hey, what if, you know, some of the questions we answered today, those type of questions are answered directly by someone in one of our HR packages. So we do have a couple of those. And then if you like, Alex, I could share real quick something that we've added to every single one of our packages.
Sure.
That kind of shows what some of the things that that Carey just talked about. Let me see if it lets me open it. It does not, so never mind. So it's not letting me share the PowerPoint. So let me try one more time and do application. And no, it only lets me do Chrome. All right, so won't be able to share that, but and every single one of those packages, regardless, like I said, if you have 2 employees or you have 150 employees, we do have those screening tests and return to work questions built in right into their app. So if you ask an employee, hey, I don't feel comfortable coming back, then you could ask those whys that Carey was asking about to see under what program they may qualify. And it also does screening questions. Have you been near someone with COVID in the last, 2 weeks or last week? All those questions that are protecting you and then giving you a nice overall picture of what your workforce looks like, availability, and sentiment as well, is all right there built into our system. So
awesome.
Does that answer your question, Stella?
Yes. All right, guys. Well, we're pretty much out of time. For us business owners, as you're well aware, human resources is an incredible and important part of what we do. There is a lot of things that we have to comply with, and it's always in our best interest to be able to make sure that we stay in compliance. We have another question. How do we reach a local rep from ADP? So I'm going to see if we can put Jaime's contact information up on the screen. If you have any questions and you need some help in regards to human resource, please contact Jaime. He will take care of you and he will make sure you are straight and you are in compliance. Remember, Like Jaime said, if you have one employee, what is it? If you have one employee, you have one liability.
Yep.
So let's make sure that we're doing the right things, not only for ourselves, but make sure that we're doing the right thing for our employees as well. With that being said, everyone, thank you so much for being here. Jaime, Carey, thank you so much for the information. It was fantastic. And I wish everyone a fantastic day. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you guys. Thank you so much.